But as we know, for younger people, they can't afford a house anymore. They can't afford a car. They've been priced out of everything by this sham system that we've got that totally robs people. And we rob them so that we can go and bomb countries and do all sorts of nefarious stuff that's terrible. It's awful. And what's the one way out? Bitcoin is the one exit valve. Whoever you're going to help, and if that's your friend, your wife, your child, get them started on Bitcoin too and squirrel it away for them. And my son, like you with your daughters, he now has a fund that's Bitcoin. I said, look, you can go to college, but you can become an entrepreneur too, and make your own business. And this would make it possible to do. And the other thing I would say, which is also up your alley, is self-custody very early on. Learn self-custody, learn it from Gigi, because that is the essential thing to do once you have Bitcoin, so that you don't lose your Bitcoin and no one can get your Bitcoin.
If you're enjoying the show, it would mean a lot to me if you'd hit subscribe and leave a quick rating or review. It helps more people find these conversations and support the mission. And if you need help getting your Bitcoin off exchanges and into self-custody, or if you're ready to build a robust, bespoke inheritance plan, the Become Unruggable one-on-one consulting program, where you will work exclusively with me, is exactly what you're looking for. You can find all the ways to reach out to me in the show notes down below. Now, let's get started with today's episode. Not many people go from software engineering to permaculture to Bitcoin fiction. But today's guest isn't your typical Bitcoiner. Welcome to Your Bitcoin Story podcast with your host, Gigi. And on this episode, I'm joined by Devin Rose, a former software engineer turned novelist, blending technology, storytelling, and hard money principles into a way few others have. He's the author of Chasing the Seeds, the first in a groundbreaking Bitcoin thriller series, and the sequel is already out. Devin's Bitcoin journey began in 2015, detouring through the altcoin jungle, and nearly culminated in launching a token during the ICO mania, until he stepped away and he came back to Bitcoin with clarity and conviction. Now living in Northeast Texas, tending orchards and practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Devin's life is a meditation on sovereignty, both digital and personal. Let's hear his Bitcoin story. Devin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gigi. I mean, just based on that introduction, I'm like, man, this guy sounds pretty cool.
No, indeed. I tried my best to make it as exciting, but it's true. Everything I said kind of shapes you into a very unique Bitcoiner. And yeah, as I mentioned, you're the author of Chasing the Seeds. I didn't mention this, but I'll mention now on the record. I'm actually few chapters away from finishing it, where Edmund finds out who his father really was. That was a shock. I'm not going to spoil it to everyone. So everyone listening, definitely, I would recommend it. I mentioned to Devin that I'm an avid Bitcoin literature reader, but not usually fiction. But Devin was kind enough to reach out to me, send me a copy. And I must say it was a very intriguing read. So definitely recommend the book. But yeah, I guess we'll get to the book in a little while. But before we get to the literature, let's start at the beginning. How did you first come across Bitcoin back in 2015?
Yes. Well, like a lot of people, I'd heard about it during the Mt. Gox stuff and didn't invest and saw it go from 1,200 to 200 or whatever and thought, oh, that was stupid. But then in 2015, a friend of mine who's turned out to be one of the biggest Ethereum maxis there is, okay? But this is before Ethereum launched. So he was like, you need to buy Bitcoin. And in part because the way to then buy Ethereum in the Ethereum ICO was you had to have Bitcoin.
Yeah, I remember.
And so he was telling me all about it. And I was like, well, wait a sec. Of these two, it seems like Bitcoin is actually the king. It's the number one. And I want to own the number one. If it's Coca-Cola and Pepsi, I want to first own Coca-Cola. Well, so I bought Bitcoin. And about a year later, in 2016, he finally convinced me to get Ethereum. And I was like, okay. So as you can imagine, I traded some of my Bitcoin for Ethereum. And Ethereum is very tricky because I'm a computer programmer. And so he sold it to me as the world computer, Turing complete virtual machine, whereas the Bitcoin script is not. You can do anything you want with Ethereum, right? All of this stuff, you know all of it. So Ethereum, of course, led me down the jungle of altcoins. The third one was XRP. I hate to even say that now.
That was my first token, so don't feel ashamed. We've been burnt down that path before.
And the only place to find it when I got into it was on the Slovenian exchange Bitstamp, which has now been bought.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was going down all of this, right? Well, in 2017, as you know, not only did you have the huge bull run, you had the ICO boom, right?
Yeah.
Every single ICO I ultimately invested in lost everything. Some were outright scams. Some were legitimate projects. Like one was a Bitcoin exchange in South Africa. It was a legit, they actually ran their product and business. They just didn't get enough business.
Mm.
But I was so enamored of that I was approached. I'm Catholic. And I was approached with doing a Catholic blockchain ICO product. Okay. And I was like, okay, I'm interested. And there was a wealthy venture capitalist. He was out in California. So he invited me and my friend to kind of like, I'd be the CTO, my friend would be the COO or whatever. Right? Well, we went out there and I'm not used to being around people with like a lot of money, like big money people
Yeah.
who they're used to getting their way
Mm.
because they have the money. But as he's talking about it, and in 2017, it was like, an ICO might raise $10 million, but then one might raise $100 million, and one might raise $1 billion. It was the mania, and so it seemed like the venture capitalists to me were getting the dollar signs in their eyes, and they didn't care anything about Christianity or the gospel. They cared about making money, and I got the bad feeling inside of like, this is going to be bad, because I was saying, look, there's some legitimate possible use cases, but the things that they were saying were not legitimate. And they were going to discredit everything I believed in. So I walked away from that project. Fast forward a little bit, we had the bear market, of course, 2018, 2019. And in the early, then 2020 happened, we had the next bull run. And I started to realize, wait a sec, Ethereum really is just another altcoin. It really is just another pre-mine. And I always like, oh yeah, Vitalik, he's kind of silly. He's got like pink purses and unicorns and whatever. But then it comes out, oh, did you know those guys had a 70% pre-mine? And I was like, 70% pre-mine? That was not advertised to the
No.
Ethereum people. And I actually went back to that original guy who got me into Ethereum, who was still very much into Ethereum, and said, can you believe this? And he's been just dumping on us the past 7 years. And he was like, yeah, but so what? And I was like, so this is just another altcoin. And the scales fell from my eyes, and I divested myself of the altcoins of Ethereum, and I went back into okay, Bitcoin is the number one. I personally, just to make clear, I don't rule out that there can be other useful projects down the line. We clearly haven't really seen them yet, but like it could happen. But in terms of money, Bitcoin is the thing. And whatever anyone else figures out on something else down the line, okay, surprise me. I'm happy to be surprised. But we got to focus on Bitcoin.
Amazing. Yeah, it's interesting, that the people that went through the 2017 cycle, the euphoria of ICOs, that's actually when my journey started. I was a financial analyst back then, and I remember everybody was launching coins left, right, and center. And I thought it was this revolutionary time where, these tokens will really change the world. And I went down into it, and I lost a lot of money down that path as well. But it's all a learning curve. And one differentiation today, kind of people getting into Bitcoin, it's not as cloudy as it was in 2017. There is all these false promises and these hype tokens. Of course, we had until recently the whole ordinal stuff and still some NFTs, which are still kind of fresh in my mind from 2 years ago. Today, generally, people entering the space, there's just Bitcoin. And that's what I like. And I hope kind of the alts just die out, in every cycle. Everybody's waiting for the altcoin season. And I've been telling people for the last 12 months, guys, I don't think there's an altcoin season coming because like there's only so many people you could burn out of it. And the records are there. And it was a one-time thing. Just like Bitcoin was a one-time thing. You cannot recreate another Bitcoin. You can't just release this token and people just, mine it on their GPUs without a pre-mine. And then suddenly everybody's using it as, sovereign money. There is only one Bitcoin. And, just to reflect on that, that's one thing that I'm bullish about, that today people entering, it's kind of, they just go straight to the Bitcoin and they skip that burning part of being, promised this false prophecy of the tokens and the world computers, which will change the world and everything. So yeah, it's a bittersweet story, if I may say so.
Well, and as you remember too, in 2017, the narrative was blockchain is going to disrupt X, Y, and Z industries.
Yeah.
It's going to disrupt ride sharing and Airbnb and
accounting.
Everything. And it disrupted none of them. But it took realizing that. And the fact that there hasn't been an altcoin season this cycle has been a big blessing because, like you said, your alt token is not going up and Bitcoin is going up. You start to see the writing on the wall and you're wondering, why am I holding this stupid token? Meanwhile, Bitcoin is following through on its promise. It's getting the momentum. It's getting all the adoption by everyone, whether you like that the government institutions are getting into it or not. They are, and they don't care much about XRP and Ethereum in spite of the lobbyists going to the government.
So let's touch upon that point until we get to the creative side of Devin Rose. What's your take on the nation states adopting Bitcoin and wanting to hold on their treasuries? Are you pro, against it, or you have a Swiss approach where you're kind of just in the middle? Hey, it is what it is.
Yeah. I'd like for Swiss to stay neutral, by the way, Gigi. Let's make Switzerland neutral again. You might remember there's a scene in Switzerland.
Yes.
So I am one of those people who do think that it was inevitable that the government was going to get into it and institutions were going to get into Bitcoin. And so my philosophy in life is I accept things. I can't control them. Kind of like a stoic type of
I was going to say a very stoic approach.
Yeah, which aligns with Christianity too, right? It's like, hey, you can't control that, and so you can't worry about it. I think it'll bring a lot of good stuff because when people see, there's a lot of normies who, when the government endorses something, that to the normies like, this must be good. And you're like, yeah, I was telling you for 10 years it's good. And you're waiting for the government to tell you, or you're waiting for Fidelity or Charles Schwab or Vanguard, to give you the okay. And we already see the governments are very, you might call them, maliciously incompetent or malevolent morons. I mean that in the best. I don't mean that like to insult people. It's just the way they are. So even when the government says they're going to get into it, what do we see? Like here in the US, we see some crypto bill or some stable coin bill. Yeah. Some claim that, the US is going to buy 1 million Bitcoin. And like they're talking about that at the Bitcoin conference right now, right? Well, I'd like to see that happen. I'd really like to see them actually do that. So whether they do that or not, one, I don't care. They can do whatever they want. Two, I think they're usually not going to follow through on their promises so well. And so you don't have to be so afraid about it. Three, the good thing is if Wall Street institutions and the government are getting into things and profiting from them, it's much less likely they are going to bring the hammer down on it. So if I were a government, like if I were especially a non-US government, I'd be buying Bitcoin hand over fist. It's the smartest thing that you could do as a government. But as you see around the world in different countries, most countries are not real smart.
Well, apart from minor few, like praise to Bukele, he's been sticking to his word, buying that 1 Bitcoin every single day. Now, recently we've had that IMF loan approved and we'll see what will happen. The date is coming up, I think, in the terms that they have mid-June, they need to stop. So we'll see what will happen or not. But just generally, on the stance of it, kind of one aspect to it is, Bitcoiners, ever since I got into my journey 8 years ago, it was always about separating the money from the state. It was always like, this is the money of the sovereign individuals. And then over the last 12 to 24 months, with the whole, government approval and, the discussions of national Bitcoin reserves, everybody's like, yay, government's buying Bitcoin. When it's like, guys, like, you were preaching, like, separate the money from the states. I was in that camp too, where I was pretty, like, 12 months ago. If you would have asked me, am I pro the government holding Bitcoin? I'd be like, yeah, of course. Like, it legitimizes everything. But now, as we're going forward and time went past on and I digested, the information, it's not that I'm against the government holding it. It's just, the more Bitcoin that the government store away in their vaults, the less Satoshis there are for future generations to acquire. And it's just going to get harder and harder. Now, some people may say, yeah, but that's fantastic, GG. Numbers go up. But it's not just about numbers go up. It's about, having the utility and using it. And also Bitcoin is, as Satoshi outlined in the white paper, peer-to-peer electronic cash. State reserve asset. Like, at the end of the day, the sats need to flow. Jack Dorsey, even though there's a lot of controversy with Jack nowadays, but he recently said on one of the podcasts that if Bitcoin is not used as money, it's essentially, it's bound to fail. And by those remarks, I believe that true, We're seeing that right now. This is the first bull market that we're hitting all-time highs, and the mempools are, like, empty. Like, there's miners, mining empty blocks, and it's just insane. Like, then we look at the numbers, and it's 100K, whatever, whatever the fiat number is. That's irrelevant. But then there's so much Bitcoin being bought by MicroStrategy and all these guys, but then nobody seems to be, showing their proof of reserves. Where just Michael Saylor in this Bitcoin conference that you mentioned is happening now in Vegas, he's sitting all smirk on the couch with one sneaker over the other sneaker saying, oh, no, it's for privacy reasons. Like, you would never do that. It's like, no, man, like, either you don't understand it or there's some fishy stuff going on. Because if Bukele can do it as a president of a country, well, man, you could do that as well, as a CEO and founder of a company. Well, he's not CEO anymore. He's a chairman now. But still, ever since ETFs came out, I've been preaching that there is paper Bitcoin going on. And I'm not a fan of Coinbase, and most ETFs are holding on Coinbase. So I think they're just, managing some numbers on their own internal ledger, and there's no sats flowing anywhere. So what's your take on that, Devin? Do you think there's paper Bitcoin? And what's your stance on Michael Saylor and his strategy incognito stash?
Yeah. If there's not paper Bitcoin flying around like they've done with gold and everything else, there will be. And there will be rehypothecation.
Yeah.
And there will be all the shenanigans. Like, it's interesting. It is, human nature to do certain things, to take advantage of certain things. And even though Bitcoin enforces honesty at this money layer, which is way better than what we have now. And so I'm all for it. It's way better. And there are going to be some people who are honest and who do build things on top of it, but that you can trust, right? It'd be like that trustworthy banker when it was the gold standard who had the gold and he let you go in the vault and see the gold. And he had not written out 50 notes for every single ounce of gold, in the vault. But there's going to be people who don't and who hide it and say, yeah, you have to trust us, right? I'm, with a guy like Saylor, he's obviously above my pay grade. He's obviously way more successful than I am. But at the same time, and you can appreciate this, I got into Bitcoin before he did, as did you.
Many of us did.
Right. Like, so yes, you and I don't have multi-billion-dollar companies that then we were able to do all of the stuff they're doing to buy a bunch. But we figured it out and even had more conviction on it.
Yeah.
Even if we didn't have billions of dollars to buy it. So, you kind of compare and think, well, you think about who the villains were from like the previous bull runs and busts. And last time, of course, we had all the infamous SBF and Do Kwon and Celsius and BlockFi, all those guys, right? I don't foresee that happening with Saylor in the same way, because even if he's off on stuff, like the whole reserve thing, it's like, come on, like there's ways of doing that, as that's not going to compromise anything. I do think he's buying the Bitcoin because I don't think it would really help him. The fact that most of these institutions are custodying it via Coinbase is a big risk. I totally agree. And as we've seen with Coinbase, they are not good. Let me couch that. They've been around a long time. Okay. And so probably their internal practices of securing Bitcoin are good. They've never had some huge hack against them. Okay. Like so many other crypto exchanges have had. On the flip side, as we see, they love the altcoin stupidity. They'll list every degenerate token so they can make money from it that gets rug pulled. The Trump coin and the Melania coin and the whatever, Solana stuff. So is there like an accident waiting to happen? Probably. Will it happen at some point? Probably.
I think so too. We discussed this with Ben from BTC Sessions a few months ago when he was on the show. He said that every cycle we have that black swan event, starting off from MTGOX and then Quadriga in his native country of Canada, and then FTX and Celsius and BlockFi and all these guys. And yeah, now I think the next black swan event maybe won't be strategy, but some big institution that's been claiming they were buying thousands of Bitcoin will turn out and the emperor will be wearing no clothes. There'll be no Bitcoin. So it's only a matter of time. I think so too. But yeah, I guess no need to bash Sailor. He does his own thing. I wish him the best of luck, all the health. You do your corporate thing. We'll do our cypherpunk thing, and we'll all get along. That's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin. We have one consensus that we all abide by, but whatever our belief and our way of living is, let it be. Just have the stoic way with the governments, with the corporations. But yeah, I guess I want to redirect now the conversation back to you, Devin, with your Bitcoin story. And let's pivot to your creative side, which I love. As I mentioned, you've written and you've shown a few times your fantastic book with Chasing the Seeds. What inspired you to write a Bitcoin novel? And why fiction instead of essays or educational content?
Yeah, and I've written nonfiction before of various kinds. So I had experience writing the nonfiction. But as you know, people, especially more conventional people, are moved by stories. People love to go see the movies. They read the novels. They watch this series on, Netflix or Amazon or whatever. And someone who would never touch a nonfiction book about Bitcoin, right? They just never would do it. You could hand them Larry Lepard's book and Lynn Alden's. You could hand them Creature from Jekyll Island, G. Edward Griffin, and they're going to be like, no, I'm not reading a 500-page book about the money system. Even though it's a well-written book, it's very interesting. It's all true and even has story aspects to it, like several of those books do. So I thought there needs to be a story, a fiction thriller that's a page turner. I don't aspire that this is high literature. This is not the Lord of the Rings or Charles Dickens or, Thoreau here. Okay. And so then I thought, well, what could it be about? They always say like, write what you know. And I was a computer programmer in Austin in my 20s, and that's the hero of the book,
Yeah.
a computer programmer.
So Edmund was actually Devin.
Yeah, and Edmund is actually the name of my son.
Amazing.
So the character in the book is kind of more like me than he is my son. I use my son's name.
Nice.
Which, when you write a book, you get to do fun things like that, right?
Yeah.
And one of the tough things is, though, with this book, to just jump briefly to something, and that's you just read, Gigi, a revealing point of the plot. Okay. But as you understand, I cannot advertise that as a reason for Bitcoiners to read the book because they have to read the book to discover that for themselves, or I've spoiled it.
Yeah.
So it's always which for me is fine because every Bitcoiner or non-Bitcoiner who discovers this book and reads it and they come to that, it's like a little secret that I share with them. It's something fun. And that's what I wanted. I wanted something where there wasn't going to be 10 pages of explanation about how a blockchain works and Merkle trees and UTXOs. It needed to be something that it was organic and natural in the story. There's a bank run and a bank holiday. because behind the scenes, there's these globalists, and the ECB is fighting the Fed, trying to drain liquidity from different banks, which a lot of that stuff I do believe happens, but I'm dramatizing it in a way. In on the cover, by the way, briefly, because you'll get a kick out of this. Some people know what this building is on the cover. It is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in this island north of the Barents Sea that's been both ruled by Russia, who had a mining base there, and now by Norway. And so Russia and Norway, have a little role in book. So just briefly, I'm on book 2 is The Syndicator's Peril. It's already out. Book 3 I'm working on right now. And Russia will also emerge in book 3.
Nice.
For anyone who cares about Russia, is interested or finds that interesting.
Exciting stuff. No, I love it, and I'm excited to finish the second one. Probably tomorrow or the day after, I will finish the Chasing the Seed, and then straight away I'm going for the next one to keep the train running. Because honestly, as I said, I really enjoyed reading it, and it was a fun factor because it's nice to mix it with just reading nonfiction and more technical stuff. And this, especially for like the person, someone who's not interested about Bitcoin, it instead of, as you said, doing an explainer of how the time chain works and UTXOs and self-custody, it just gives a real use case where, like, when the whole financial system stops, this is the only thing that you can transact in. And it's a nice kind of like, maybe there is a point to this. It's not just numbers go up, but it's actually like the freedom tool for me to transact with anyone at any point in time. So yeah, no, I love it. So, but going back to what drove you, I mean, you said you used to write nonfiction, but like, what was that moment in your life where you were like, let me write this book?
Yeah, so at the time I started writing the book, I had 2 children, my son and my daughter. While I was writing this book, my daughter actually relapsed with leukemia, and I was writing it in the hospital, and I was reading her the chapters as I wrote it. She ended up passing away about 1.5 years ago before the book was published. But as I was writing this book, I was writing it because I wanted even my teen children, who were young teens, to be able to read an exciting book. But, you can't give your children a book that's an adult book that's got explicit, profane stuff in it. Okay, even if you read that or don't mind it. And I had read a series. There's a famous libertarian. His name's Doug Casey. His site is called International Man. He lives in like Uruguay. Okay, so he's kind of like anarcho-capitalist libertarian. He joined up with an author and actually has written or is writing a book series. The first book's called Speculator. I don't mind sharing it with people because I enjoyed the book.
Yeah.
It's a fun book. It's a thriller. Here's the funny thing. Instead of like Bitcoin being the thing that makes it possible for people to do stuff, he's kind of like more boomer age, and it ends up being gold. Is instead of Bitcoin, it's gold.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, there's some cool stuff in this book.
Like Atlas Shrugged, right?
Yeah, exactly. But my kids aren't going to read it. I mean, Atlas Shrugged, of course, is like 900 pages, and there's whole, this is a 20-page, economic primer, and it's couched as like a dialogue or something. And there were some aspects that were very adult of some of those books and so I wanted this to be a clean story that even a young person could read, probably 14 years and above, because I don't know, like my son enjoyed it, but some kids are going to like read about like globalist banking cartel and be like, what's a globalist banking cartel?
That'd be a nice question to their parents. Like, son, what are you reading?
And I'll tell you this is interesting. So in our community here, we've kind of become a tight-knit community. Well, most of the people are not into Bitcoin, all right, in spite of all my efforts. Some have gotten into it, but most not. But what's happening is the teens have gotten the book, they've enjoyed it, passed it around to each other. So then actually, even though my friends who are the parents are not into Bitcoin, their children are getting into Bitcoin. And so it's easier, of course, as our education systems learned, it's easier to teach a child than it is to convince an adult.
100%. 100%. And it's interesting, you mentioned that kind of, in my eyes, that's more important to convert the younger generations to the Bitcoin way of life instead of the older generations, which, as you said, like it's very hard to tell someone that most things that he knows about money and life aren't true. And some people, they don't want to grasp that reality. Some people, they find it very hard and they just want to ignore it and go by their usual lifestyle. But the younger generations are the ones which are kind of exploring and figuring things out. And they are the ones who will be controlling the world in the future. Everything in life is a cycle, from the day where the sun comes up and goes down and the moon comes out. We are born, we go through life, we pass away, and new life is created. So I guess,
and as you know what, for baby boomers, especially in the US, like the way that they lived their life and invested worked for them. The system worked for them.
Yeah.
And so they're going on their cruises and they're doing all their stuff. And you know what? I'm not going to criticize them for that. Okay. Like, do whatever. And these are somewhat stereotypes, but still. I'm right at the end of the Gen X generation. So I'm technically Gen X, right before it became millennial. But
yeah.
So it's like, but as we've seen, and so trying to convince them to change the way they do things, are like, why? When for 70 years, the way that I've done it worked. I put my money in the 1K and the Roth IRA and the index mutual fund. And look, now I'm rich after 40 years. But as we know, for younger people, they can't afford a house anymore. They can't afford a car. They've been priced out of everything by this sham system that we've got that totally robs people. And we rob them so that we can go and bomb countries and do all sorts of nefarious stuff that's terrible. And it's awful. And like, what's the one way out? Like, Bitcoin is the one exit valve, escape, possible solution for basically anyone who's younger than 45 years old.
Yeah, very true. And not just under 45 years old, if you don't agree with what your government does and you don't want to fund and feed the system, your only way out is, by converting it to Bitcoin. Not even holding your cash, because by you holding that cash and spending that cash, you're still facilitating that system. And gold, you can't exactly go and get a bunch of gold and, go to your coffee shop and, scrape some gold dust and pay for your coffee. I don't think that'll be an option. So you literally have no other option. And thanks to Satoshi, blessing the world with this code that can be tampered with, it's the first time ever in, monetary human history where you have a parallel system. And at the time of this recording, in end of May 2025, it's already the 5th largest asset class in the world after only 16 years. And if that doesn't blow up your mind, I don't know what will. Like, it's fascinating. And still at this time, it's still so early in its infancy. We've just crossed the 4th epoch with the halving. We're in the 5th epoch now. And most people don't know this. And for sure, some listeners to this episode don't. So I'll notify you. Bitcoin has 32 halvings programmed in its protocol, and we only crossed 4. So we have 28 to go. And, when people say, well, Gigi, I missed the boat on Bitcoin, I should listen to you. And you were telling me years ago, I go, well, you're not too late. Like, act now, start, DCAing now. And, in 4 years time, in 5 years time, in 10 years time, you'll be thanking yourself for pulling the trigger and getting in at this moment now. So, and to be honest, right now, even though we're in fiat terms at 100K mark, in my opinion, it was never a safer time to get into Bitcoin than now. Because 10 years ago in 2015, when you started, Devin, your journey, it was still like, it was very unpredictable. Is this gonna, what's gonna happen? We had some cycles, it pumped, it dumped. Is this like drug illicit money? Will it be, legitimized? It was a lot of questions. And that's why I think a lot of people that started early on just didn't go all in on Bitcoin, because it was a big like question mark. Is something going to happen out of this? And now in 2025, I guess you don't have to ask your question, is it going to happen? It's just how fast is it going to happen? The more, the nation states hate it to love it, adopt it, the more we will see it widespread and businesses accepting it. One of the projects in the space, shout out to BTC Pay Server, they're doing a fantastic job where they're allowing any e-commerce store to just do a plugin, do a self-custodial Bitcoin payment service. They charge 0 fees. There's no fee. It's all open source, which I love. just like Seed Signer and all other, community-led projects, where you can now charge in Bitcoin for any service or product that you want to anyone in the world. Doesn't matter if the country's sanctioned or it's not, or your government doesn't like the people from that country. Like, it just opens the whole world to you. And that to me is super, super inspiring and super bullish. I don't want to use that word too much, but I'm very optimistic about the future that we're building. And going back to where I started this rant on how early we are, get involved today. There is no more time to be waiting to see, is Bitcoin going to work out? Is it not? Like, start acting on the now.
Well, when we're 100K, you and I both have high conviction. It'll be $1 million.
For sure. Without a doubt.
Probably it won't be 10 years. It might be 5 years away we hit $1 million. Right?
Yeah.
Very possible.
Well, if the US, sorry for interrupting, if the US wants to buy 1 million Bitcoin, which I think even Samson said probably not, but like if they want to buy 1 million Bitcoin, it's gonna be $1 million per coin very soon. Irrelevant if that doesn't happen. Still, I agree. In 5 years' time, very plausible.
Yeah, and in 2015, you're exactly right. When I bought Bitcoin, it was $373 per Bitcoin. Now, of course, you think that's crazy, but you described me perfectly. I was like, this is insane. Even putting $100 into this is risky. I'm going to lose my $100, right? It had just gone down 90% from the Mt. Gox, hack or whatever. But then it was $1,000, and $1,000 was insane. Well, then it was $10,000, right? And pulled back. Well, then of course we hit $69,000.
Yeah.
Then we hit 100,000. And so now as we see it, it's like, okay, if I told you that in 5 years it's going to be $1 million, what else could you put your money in that will 10x in 5 years, right? Nothing. And we don't know if it'll do that. And it's not even like there's a lot that we want to do. Like even here in the US, this one Steak and Shake fast food restaurant started.
I saw, yeah.
Bitcoin. I went to a Dallas Bitcoin conference called BitBlock Boom. People were buying my book with Stripe.
Bitcoin.
They were using Lightning, paying for it in Bitcoin. Almost everyone did. Like one person wanted to use, I think, credit card. One person wanted to use cash. One person paid Bitcoin, just L1.
Nice.
Fees were low, so it was fine. But like, yeah, as you're describing it, you make a choice. Every dollar that you hold, right? Every euro you hold, or yen, or whatever, you're saying, okay, I like this Federal Reserve note, or whatever it says on your bill, and I'm choosing that instead of hard money, Bitcoin. So make it start today, and your life is going to be better.
For sure. And some people have this conviction where, and I think Saylor had a part to play in that as well, where he was preaching, never sell your Bitcoin, like never sell it. And a lot of people that entered and were listening to Saylor were kind of like, oh, like this is my savings tool. Like I'm never touching the Bitcoin. But I encourage people, whenever you go to a website and you can pay for a service or a product with Bitcoin, go for it. Like do your little deed and do the transaction. And if you don't want to touch your stash, that's perfectly fine. Go to your Strike, River, wherever you buy your Bitcoin, buy that amount in fiat terms in Bitcoin, and then just send that Bitcoin to the merchant. At the end of the day, this is money to be used, even though today, of course, it's much smarter to be saving in Bitcoin than just spending it outright. But if you live on a Bitcoin standard, which in my case, I've been living on a Bitcoin standard for a couple of years now, I don't really have a choice. Any fiat that comes to me gets auto-converted. Actually, I had a fiat payment come in a couple of hours before the show, and without even thinking, it just goes straight into Bitcoin, and I spend Bitcoin for everything. And to me, it's incredible the mind, like how your spending psychology changes when you're on a Bitcoin standard. You really question your spending habits, and when you want to buy something, you're like, do I really want this? Like, I've been on the same smartphone for the last 3 years, and I don't care how few millimeters thinner it gets every September when Apple announces it, or there's an extra button, or there's an extra AI feature. Like that doesn't change my fact that I can call someone, send a message on Telegram, Signal, or whatever. And to me, it's fascinating how this digital money really changes your spending habits. And I think that is something that really the world needs, because we live in this consumerism. How do you want to call it?
instant
idiocracy, if
gratification.
that's a word. I mean, this whole just spend, 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 and no wonder nobody has any savings. And, on a Bitcoin standard, you really, spend the money on things that actually make your life better. So that's one
Yeah.
piece of advice. I'm not saying everybody should go, and people are in different circumstances, but if you want to test it out, go on a Bitcoin standard for a month and see how your spending habits change.
Yeah, and I'm impressed by everyone who's done it. One of my friends has, you have, maybe you have two friends. I've not gone that far yet,
Hmm.
but I make up for it by the fact that my portfolio is, whatever, 90% Bitcoin. So,
Yeah.
but to your point about that too, right? It's like it changes your time preference for lots of things. And now you're thinking, yeah, do I really need that? Because you understand the cost of buying it versus
Hmm.
not buying it. And a year later, oh, guess what? I just doubled my money again.
Everything gets cheaper. That's the
Everything got
that's the
cheaper.
magic trick. Even if in fiat
Right.
terms things are getting more expensive on inflation, it's getting cheaper on a Bitcoin standard.
And so then you could have something even better a year later. Or you just bought yourself that much more freedom for your time
Mm.
because guess what? You now have this, and every month that goes by that you don't spend all of it or whatever, right? Or you're accumulating, you actually have more of your own time to be able to use. And this, my wife wasn't on board with Bitcoin for the first 9 years. It
Wow.
wasn't until last year, like she was okay that I had gotten it, and I managed the money, and so it was kind of like, this magic internet money, whatever. He's doing something with it. But last year, she finally got it. It clicked, and it's now she and I have had lots of good conversations about time preference.
Mm.
Well, we could do this, and to your point, you know, it if you can use Bitcoin, you might have a medical bill you need to pay. Your child might want to go to college, right? You might have a home renovation that you've dreamed of doing your whole life, right? Like I absolutely will will sell Bitcoin for that.
Mm.
Now I hope I can replenish it, but the whole point of it is to live your life. And
Very true.
you know,
It's a
not
tool for a better lifestyle. It's not a tool for just saving till death and giving it away.
right. Like, and I'm sure obviously if you have some to leave to your children, like that's a noble thing, an inheritance. It gives them a leg up. But the great thing too is like, for example, we had this 529 savings plan, which is a US based college savings.
Mm.
They constrain the investment options that you can invest in. I liquidated it. I paid the penalty. You pay a penalty for selling it and withdrawing it. Put it all into Bitcoin. This was for my son. It was $25,000 per Bitcoin, right? Because this is about a year and a half ago. And well, guess what? It's 4x from there, right?
Yeah.
But I've stored that for him. He now, my son's 15, is saving up for a car with his Bitcoin,
Mm.
and he has like $4,000 worth of Bitcoin. As you and I know, this bull run, we might hit 200K.
Mm.
And for him, though he knows it's valuable and he's trying to get a job to make more fiat money, it'll probably double to $8,000. He'll buy a car with it, which at
Yeah.
16 years old in the US, being able to drive a car is, ultimate freedom. So he's excited about it, but he also understands that he wants to accumulate more Bitcoin again.
Nice. That's the mindset, of instead of, my main kind of advice that I give people is try and have more sats than try have more sats at the end of the month than what you had at the beginning of the month. You don't have to have exuberant goals of getting 1 Bitcoin, 5 Bitcoin, 10 Bitcoin. I think that the further we go, these goals become a little bit unattainable because at some point when Bitcoin's $1 million, like you're gonna have to work a lot to get to that 1 Bitcoin. So don't have that as the target. Just have constant accumulation, every month, buy a little bit, whatever you can. Even better, sell a product or service, as I said, that's essentially KYC free Bitcoin that you're getting, and you're actually getting, the hardest money for your hard work or your service that you're providing. which over time compounds. One of my favorite people in the space is Jeff Booth, and he talks a lot about how he has this. I think you probably heard about it, Devin, as well, where he values Bitcoin at even today at $47 million per coin, and his calculation is basically. Have you heard that before or no?
No, I have his book, The Price of Tomorrow, and I've watched a lot, but I haven't heard that he currently values it at 47
Yeah,
million.
and you know what the formula is for $47 million per coin? He basically takes the calculation of all the assets in the world, or all the real estate, all the gold, all the currencies, all the derivatives. Most people don't know derivatives is the biggest $1 trillion market, and that's a scam of its own. But anyways, all of the money in the world that we have is give or take a little bit over $900 trillion. And if you divide 900 trillion by 21 million Bitcoin, you get to 47 million. And he said it's only a matter of time, until this revelation of $47 million a coin will come true. Because he says it's even going to be more in the future because the governments keep on printing money. So they keep devaluating. The more the government prints and devalues fiat, the higher the appreciation of Bitcoin. That's why I always say, Bitcoin's going up forever. I've even got it, I'm a big fan also of Knut's Svanholm. I've got the infinity over 21 million tattooed on my arm, where everything in the world is divided by 21 million. So, the numbers will go up forever. I don't know if I'll live to see the $47 million per coin in my lifetime, but that doesn't matter. The point is, I truly believe that Bitcoin is a monetary system that's going to be here for 1,000+ years, because fiat and every monetary system that we had, give or take, they rule for about 100. I think maximum was 200 years that a monetary system was the global reserve. But now Bitcoin really is something that's untamperable. And especially in 120 years, so in 2140, when the last Satoshi is mined, not last Bitcoin, but last Satoshi, and there's no more Bitcoin ever being created. I mean, wow, what a price shock that's going to be. It's a shame we're not going to live, Devin, in 120 years to see that. Maybe our grandchildren will. And I think they'll be happy with the inheritance stash that we'll be passing down.
They're going to be thrilled that their granddaddy and their great-grandfather was there when it started and actually bought some.
That's true. That's true.
And I mean, as you know, these empires don't go down easily.
No.
And it almost always requires a war and an upheaval.
Well, Rome was collapsing for 100+ years. Most people, it's not just one day you wake up and bam, the empire's down. Right. It takes a long time.
Yeah, and the same thing happened with England, who had the reserve currency. The same will happen with the U.S. I mean, as we see,
I think it's already happening. It's just they don't want to admit it.
In no matter which party is in power, they both are happy to spend crazy, insane amounts of money, and Trump and the Republicans are showing the same thing. And by no means am I saying these parties are the same. I have my own opinions about them, believe me, but in terms of spending, they're spending trillions of dollars they don't have. The debt, it will continue to go. There's no way to pay it.
The debt ceiling's going up forever, Laura. That's the quote.
Yeah. And therefore, then, we're being stolen from forever. And as long as the dollar is a world reserve currency, it means every single holder of dollars around the world is being stolen from. Right, which is why the U.S. government has been able to do this for so long, because we're literally stealing from the productive capacity of most of the world with our dollar system. It's a great system for certain people, right? But again, about human nature, it's like the One Ring in the Lord of the Rings. No one or person nor government should have this power because they will abuse it. And they will use it to propagate their own schemes and propagate the animal to just keep on getting bigger. And that's the system we're all under right now. And we're doing our best. And the fact that we're stacking sats is saying, we know this can't be sustained forever, and eventually it won't. You can't control this no matter what you do. You can't. Therefore, I'm going to put it away right over here. It's useful in the meantime, and it will be especially useful if the bad stuff happens that we know eventually will happen.
Yeah, and when you were saying that, with the two parties, doesn't matter which party's in power, they keep raising the debt ceiling and printing more and more. And the quote that came to my mind is one of my favorite Einstein quotes, which I mentioned a few times on this show, which Einstein famously said, "You can't fix the problems with the same mind which you created them with." So, essentially they can't. They're in a box and they just keep shifting that box around, but they can't hop out the box. But thanks to Satoshi again, he created, the solution with a different mind, and you have that opportunity to opt out and, live your own life on your own terms and kind of not be a participant of this draconian system that's just sucking away your energy, money, and basically your prosperity, which...
Well, in Gigi, this is what they don't. So there's a theme. So the theme of this series is, okay, the theme is, and that's the overarching kind of whole point of the books. Okay, there's individual plots, but the theme is individual sovereignty and subsidiarity. I'll explain later. Versus centralized totalitarian control. As we see, the totalitarians in wherever they are, whether in the U.S. or the Eurozone, they want to control you. They do not want Gigi to do what he wants to do.
Yeah.
You need to be a vassal who basically slaves away for them. Well, the principle of subsidiarity is simply to solve the problem at the lowest level, closest to the problem, right? A person solves a problem, a family, a neighborhood, a town, right? The United Nations solves the problem that my road out here has potholes in it or something like that, right? That's the bad idea. They're way too far away from it. Not to mention, I don't want to have the UN anywhere near me. So the books are exploring this theme of the battle between top-down centralized control versus sovereignty and subsidiarity. Which one's going to win? Now, spoiler alert, in the series, I'm going to make the sovereignty subsidiarity win. In the world, what will happen? We don't know who will win. Like, case in point, you've mentioned El Salvador. The IMF has the stranglehold in all these countries. And El Salvador is right next to Honduras, which is where my dad's from. They're called banana republics. They're poor. And but Bukele did this courageous move. But the IMF still has a hold on him, right? And so now we're going to see, is he going to have to capitulate and quit buying Bitcoin? Because the country is still in debt and beholden, and they do still need this money from the outside. We'll find out.
That story is to be told, and we'll see what happens in the coming months. Maybe he will just be accumulating through a wallet address that he's not publicly putting. Who knows? Well, at the end of the day, I mean, they spent like over $1 billion. Well, not them, but investors on the whole volcano mining operation. So is that going to stop? I don't know. We're yet to see, but yeah, I totally agree with you, Devin, on that factor, that every country that's entangled and has a debt, to the IMF and essentially the US dollar, which is most countries. Actually, the country I'm based in now, Russia, is one of like the handful of countries that has zero US dollar debt, which actually no mainstream media talks about that, which is very strange, right? But like they kind of... It's interesting how they dictate their own rules and they have their own financial system. And since they were decapitated from the SWIFT protocol and essentially they have no interaction with traditional banking. Since I departed the bureaucratic EU zone last year and I've been living here now for a year, I can say that banking is like light years ahead. Not as close as China, but like it's incredible. You can send money to anyone just with a phone number. You can like everything is so advanced. And yet you would think like, oh, since they've been like, sanctioned off, they're dying off. And, actually those sanctions that started not 2 years ago, but a decade ago in 2014, when the Orange Revolution started in Kiev, which was financed by some people, you know who, have essentially boomeranged to the West where, energy prices went through the roof and this whole bombing of the Nord Stream pipe last year. Wow, like it's crazy. Like I don't want to take any sides, but like sometimes the sanctions and the big bureaucrats that want to play the big boy games, they step a little bit too far. Now I'm not here to shill and promote Russia. Disclaimer, not sponsored by Putin or anyone in this country to promote it, but I'm just speaking my truth as a self-sovereign individual that decided to go somewhere where I'm treated best, where I find a better lifestyle to raise my kids and enjoy my everyday life. And that can change tomorrow. You never know what tomorrow beholds. But all I know is if something changes here tomorrow and I'm not comfortable here anymore, I can pack up my bags. I have no real estate here. I have minimal assets. All of our wealth, essentially our savings, are in Bitcoin. So I can just board the flight, fly out, and leave everything behind. And that's the true power of Bitcoin, where you're not restricted to a geographic location. May that be the political system, may that be the financial well-being, may that be the things that you want to pursue are not legal in your country. I mean, who are governments to tell you what you can do or can't do? I mean, governments at the end of the day should be here to serve the people, and not us people serving the government and abiding by their rules and having to explain everything and declare everything and pay ridiculous taxes. Now, I'm not against taxation, but like over taxation, where I truly believe like you pay one tax and that's it. So if you want to do an income tax, do that, or do VAT, do that, or capital gains, but don't do everything, property tax, capital tax, road tax. I'm waiting for the day when they're going to come out with an air tax. Oh, you're breathing air outside? Tax us. We'll implant an oxygen meter. Like how much oxygen you sucking in through the atmosphere. It's insane. Like you're paying
You're
taxes
giving
for
them
everything.
ideas, Gigi. You're giving them ideas. Well, you know what's funny that you say this, because on the desk behind me is my property tax, a bill for land I own here in Texas. And the appraisal from last year to this year went up 3x.
Wow.
270%. And you pay taxes based on a percentage of that.
On a property that you own. You're not renting. You
That's
own
correct.
the property and you need to pay that,
And so
that
the
tax on
property
it.
tax serves as a way to make you, even as an owner, have to be a renter, and you are basically, you don't own your private property. So this is a real thing happening, and I'm waiting for there to be a government in a country that gets smart and says, we are going to treat people best here, and we are going to attract all of these people who have Bitcoin and who want to live their life, right? And they're the people who do that too. They're the good people who are productive, and they're not trying to like hurt people and scam them and whatever. We have to see if there's even one country that's smart enough to welcome them.
We'll see. I mean, if a country does that, it's going to be by far the smartest thing, because as you said, like Bitcoiners are some of the most genuine, hardworking people and just positive people. Like I mentioned a lot of times, I'm yet to meet a depressed Bitcoiner. Devin, have you ever met a hardcore Bitcoiner who's depressed about life and
No,
just
because
is
even the
miserable?
people who I know who are Bitcoiners who are a little bit more, call them like melancholic temperament or a little more dour.
Yeah.
They actually are very hopeful because they have found Bitcoin, and so they're not like a real depressive mindset, that people get into where they just kind of spiral downward. I mean, it does offer hope at a natural level for people when they feel trapped in the system,
Yeah, but thankfully with Bitcoin, there's a lot of opportunities on the horizon, and I think with every passing year, there's more and more things that you can plug into the network and contribute your way. Most people think that if I'm not a programmer, like I can't really do anything in the space. I'm one of those people. I'm not tech savvy guy, and I'm not a far off a programmer. Thanks to AI today, I can prompt some code, but I'm in no means a programmer. But the fact that I'm doing what I'm doing, with the show, recording these stories, sharing it with the world, leaving my little bit of legacy for my kids and grandchildren to listen back to those tracks, how it was in the early days. Maybe it was in 2010, but still, everything in 10, 20 years time, I think these stories will be pretty interesting, where hopefully Bitcoin is, the global reserve currency, and we are on a Bitcoin international standard, or maybe not, maybe long after I'm gone. But the fact that I'm doing what I love makes me so optimistic about where we're going. And I encourage anyone who has ideas or who wants to do it, especially if you're young, take that leap of faith. Don't be afraid, because the rhetoric that you're told, go to university, get the best degree, apply for a job, work on that job for 20 years to climb that ladder to get to the manager level, that's gone. Like there is that doesn't exist anymore. So instead of you being on this rat race of getting the next fiat job, just try focusing on yourself and find something that you love and just offer it, may that be a product or a service, for Bitcoin, and you're going to be so much better well off, and you're going to, like a magnet, attract all these Bitcoiners that are willing to support you and buy from you just because, you know, you are providing value in the network. And the last point that I want to bring up on this is that in the Bitcoin network, there is no rent seekers like we have in the legacy system, where, you know, there's middlemen just taking cuts from doing absolutely nothing. The proof of work is not just in the hashing aspect of Bitcoin, it's in your actual production of value. You need to do that proof of work. You need to give some value for someone to give their hard-earned sats for your service or your product. And I think on that route, we are going to build a much more beautiful and productive and efficient world. May that be through the spending habits, which actually I think that will also make the world much more green and sustainable by us changing our consumer behavior, where we're not over indulging on things that we don't need, but we're actually spending money. And in some cases, like I do, I actually spend more on products knowing that I'll be buying less of them, because I know with the low time preference, if I spend a little bit more on a more premium product, it's going to last me way longer than if I'm saving a few bucks on a product, but then I'm going to have to change it next year. So, you know, there's many different components that plays into the role of that. But yeah, I just encourage everyone to get involved any way they can. I think that's the best thing you can do today.
Yeah, I second everything you said, Gigi. As someone who did the thing where he got the job and sat in a cubicle for 20 years, because that's what I was told to do. Like, don't do that. Do what Gigi does in terms of the product or service you believe in, where you're adding value. You take Bitcoin for it. Like, you're living the dream, Gigi.
Yeah, no, I take it very humbly, like sometimes people think, like you need to make X amount of money to be free. Actually, no, like I realized you become super wealthy when you have control over your time, when you're not dependent on someone's schedule and, answering to someone, but really focusing on what you love doing. And the only reason I'm doing what I'm doing today is thanks to Bitcoin, because I've been, I was going to say religiously, but I was very disciplined in my DCA for many years. And last year, when we approached this 100K, I said, hey, like, this is the time to go and actually focus on myself and, go all in on this. And I think it was the best move. Maybe I'm making less fiat money today, but I know in the long term, through the Bitcoin standard, it's going to well pay off. And, I have 2 young daughters. I have a 5 and a 3-year-old. And they're already fully Bitcoinized. They know Bitcoin. And when they see a Bitcoin somewhere, they're like, oh, daddy, Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. I read them Bitcoin books before bed. Shout out to Choudhary, the night story, the story of Satoshi Nakamoto and mining and everything. So they're already like, they're so young, but they're already down it. Like, I can't wait for the day when I'll be installing their own wallets on their phones. And, their ice cream money is going to be in sats, not in rubles or dollars or yen or whatever. So yeah, I'm really bullish on that, and I really want them in 13, 15 years time, when they're at that age finishing, high school, when it's their age to actually go to university and everything. I won't be pushing on university. I'm not against university. If you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or something, you can't really just wing it. But like, how many people just like myself had no idea what I wanted to do, and I got the most generic degree that you can ever get, which is business management, which is a degree of nothing. And then when you finish that degree, you apply for these jobs, which each require like minimum 3-5 years work experience. And you're like, guys, I'm looking for my first job. How I can't get no job. I realized, wow, like this money and time I spent these 3-4 years, just absolute waste. Instead, I'll really encourage my kids to, you have an idea, you want to try something out, go and do jobs, or you want to start a business of your own. They will have the funds to try out and actually experience what they want to do through their own actions, instead of living the life by the book. And who knows what the world's going to be like in 13 years, but at least, they have this sovereign opportunity to live the life that they want. So yeah, I guess to round it up, we touched upon some interesting and some powerful points, but to round up our conversation, Devin, what is one piece of advice you would give to people that are starting their Bitcoin journey today?
Yeah, great question. Well, one thing that you just said that I second, and that's not just you, but whoever you're going to help. And if that's your friend, your wife, your child, get them started on Bitcoin too, and squirrel it away for them. And my son, like you with your daughters, he now has a fund that's Bitcoin. I said, look, you can go to college, but you can become an entrepreneur too and make your own business. And this would make it possible to do. And the other thing I would say, which is also up your alley, is self-custody. Very early on, learn self-custody, learn it from Gigi, because that is the essential thing to do once you have Bitcoin, so that you don't lose your Bitcoin and no one can get your Bitcoin.
Very
So
true.
yeah, so Gigi, thank you for having me on. This has been great to chat.
No, thank you, Devin. It's been a real pleasure. I know you've been a fan of the show, so I'm really happy that I had one fellow fan on the show, and not just a fan, but actually an avid contributor to the space. And as I mentioned, I loved your book. I can't wait to get into the sequel. And of course, the third one, when that book comes out, I'll definitely be reading that as well. But Devin, is there anywhere you'd like to send our listeners if they want to follow your work? Of course, read the
You know,
book or just connect online.
the books are on Amazon, and then on X, I'm Devin S. Rose, and so I post permaculture and Bitcoin stuff a lot, and some just political stuff, some Catholic stuff. So it's a hodgepodge. But yeah, that'd be great, Gigi.
Awesome. Well, we'll link all of those links in the show notes. Devin, thanks again for coming on and sharing your story. It was an absolute pleasure. Your story is full of turns, but always seem to come back to the same place: truth, discipline, and freedom. For those who want to check out Devin's book, Chasing the Seeds and its sequel are out now, available on Amazon. Links, as I mentioned, will be in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me today, and everyone watching or listening. Thank you for tuning in to your Bitcoin Story podcast. If you found this episode insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps spread the signal. And if you're ready to take control of your Bitcoin and your future, reach out to me for my one-on-one self-custody consulting program, Become Unruggable. We'll learn how to hold your own keys with confidence and never depend on a middleman again. Reach out to me on X or send me an email at becomeunruggable@proton.me. Because in the end, Bitcoin isn't just about money. It's about reclaiming your power. Until next time, stay sovereign.